So far, the types of transformations that I've showed you is where we started with a parent function, and then I told you what the end function looks like. But now what we're going to do is where I start with a parent function, and I give you some instructions, and then we're going to determine what the final function will look like. So let's start with example 1. So basically, if you had to title this, it's transforming y equals the square root of x with instructions. All right. So here's example 1. I'll just show you a couple of examples. So here's example 1, and the next video will be example 2. So say, for example, I have a parent function, which is obviously f of x is the square root of x, and I'm going to transform it to g of x. All right? I'm going to transform it to g of x, and I'm not going to tell you what g of x is. I'm simply going to tell you the transformations I'm going to do to root of x in order to get to the g of x. And what they are is, say, a reflection across the x-axis, okay, a horizontal stretch. So maybe actually I shouldn't use the word horizontal stretch. I should say a stretch in the x direction by a factor of 1/2. And finally, a translation by 3, -4. Okay, so this is all part of the question, right? Like you haven't deciphered anything. I've just told you it's gone from f to g, and how has it gone through? It's gone through these 3 transformations right here. So let's ask you the question. Question A is find an expression for g of x. Now, if you recall, we've done something very similar when I told you that the parent function was f of x equals x squared. So let's just see how this works for f of x equals the square root of x. So if you recall, let's do that. So g of x, right, is some transformation of f of x. So it's equal to f. I'm going to put an open bracket, and we're going to use all this information to help us determine what the symbols and numbers need to be. So since it's a reflection across the x-axis, we know that there's a negative outside of f. So because it's going to affect the y's, so it's outside of f. Then what we see is a stretch in the x direction by 1/2. Since it's a stretch in the x direction, we know it's going to be inside of f, and since it's by 1/2, we have to do the reciprocal value, so it's going to be 2. And then what we're going to do is we know that there's a translation by 3 to the right. So since it's 3 to the right, we have to express what's inside in factored form. So it's going to be x minus 3. So I'm going to close it there and close it there, and then it's going to be -4 because it means it's 4 down. So once again, just to recap, this negative came from the reflection across the x-axis. The stretch in the x direction by 1/2, so that means the reciprocal is taken, so it's 2. And there's a translation by 3, so which means that what's inside of f has to be in factored form, so it's x minus 3. And then we subtract 4, we know that we go down, and there we go. But remember, this is not our final answer, because here g is expressed in terms of f. What we want is g as a function, in other words, a square root function, because we know f is a square root function. So if you recall from last time, when basically whatever is in this x over here must be represented by that x over there. So for example, if this x over here is 2 open bracket x minus 3 close bracket, then that must mean that this will also be replaced by 2 open bracket x minus 3 close bracket. So just keep that in mind. So this is simply going to be negative. And I'm going to write this in yellow, so basically it just sort of makes sense. So first, there's going to be a square root because f is a square root. So this is going to be a square root. Now, what will be inside that square root? Well, it's everything here because since that's x, we simply replace all of that with this, and we're going to replace that x with this. So it's going to be 2x minus 3, and then minus, oops, and then maybe I should use green. And then that's going to be -4. So the first thing is we have an expression for g of x, which is simply negative square root of 2x minus 3 minus 4. Next, so the next question is, so the next question is sketch g of x, right? So since g of x is simply a transformation from the parent function, which is square root of x, we can pretty much read right off the bat what the transformations are. In fact, since we're given the transformation, the reflection across and all that, we can use this to help determine what the function will look like. So let's start off here. So once again, if I have a graph like that, so I'm just going to start off right away. So let's say this is my basic parent function, which is square root of x. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to reflect it across the x-axis. So if I'm going to reflect it across the x-axis, what that means is it's going to look like this. So it's going to look like this. So that's a reflection across the x-axis. And what I'm going to do is just erase the old function. So there we go. And I'm going to check that one off. So oops, we check that one off. And then we're going to stretch it in the x direction by half, which means we're going to shrink all the x's by half. So if I'm going to shrink all the x's by half, basically it's still going to sort of point in the same direction, but now just be about half as long, or really it isn't long, it's just the x values are just all shrunken by half. And then I'm going to erase that. And there we go. So that's really good. And so that's done. And now it's simple. It's translate to the right by 3 and down by 4. Okay, so I'm going to do both of those in just one step. So if it's the right by 3, so let's do that. So the right by 3 and then down by negative 4, which means this is your starting point. And then it's just going to go down like that. And I'm going to erase the old function over there. There we go. And basically, this point is my starting point, which is 3, negative 4. And there you go. This blue graph right now is the sketch of g of x. I hope that made sense. And in the next video, I'm going to go through one last example of how to do this if I provide you with instructions. See you in the next video.